Or good morning, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel of Devops.com. We're going to be starting our webinar in just about 30 seconds to a minute here to give late arriving attendees a chance to clock in. So please stand by for another few moments as we give everyone a chance to come in. While we're waiting for everyone to come in, for those of you on right now, you'll notice in your GoToWebinar control panel, which for most of you will be on the right side of your screen, you will see a various blue section headings, one of which is labeled questions. We have made provisions and we've left time at the end of our webinar to answer questions from both Jean and Rajat Bhargava, and you can put your questions in here and we will answer them at the appropriate time. Based on previous experience, my advice to you is to put your questions in real time as you think of them. They will be stored in the questions section and we will be able to answer them at the appropriate time. Many times when you try to think about, or you're going to try to remember a question for when you want to ask it, of course, you of course forget it and lose the opportunity. Jean, Kim, and Raj, as I said, set aside time for questions, and we're looking forward to a lot of questions from the audience. I know whenever Jean speaks, there's always interest and questions, and this will be a great opportunity for you to do so. So we are about a minute or two after the hour, and we'll get started right now. For those of you who are here now and perhaps weren't when I first came on, my name is Alan Schimmel, and I am the editor-in-chief of Devops.com. Thank you for joining us on another in our continuing series of webinars today. Today's webinar is sponsored by JumpCloud, and the topic is IT Decentralization, how to speed up your organization safely. We have a fantastic panel today who happen to be both two good friends of mine. Our two panelists today are Rajat Bhargava, CEO and founder of JumpCloud, and Jean Kim, I don't know if it's best-selling, renowned author of The Phoenix Project, IT Revolution Press, researcher, co-founder of Tripwire. Jean, Raj, welcome to our webinar.
Thanks for having us, Alan.
Great to be here, Alan.
Fantastic, guys.
And great being on the panel with you, Raj. Long time no talk.
Exactly, same, Gene.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to a great panel with two experienced webinar speakers. Raj, I think we're going to let you drive the initial part of this, so if you don't mind, take it over.
Great, thanks, Alan. Great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I want to start with basically just a quick introduction. My name is Rajat Bhargava. I'm CEO, co-founder of JumpCloud. JumpCloud is a directory as a service solution, and we're going to be talking a little bit today about IT decentralization, and it's a topic that I'm very passionate about because it sort of transcends from just IT into how to make your business better, how to make your business go faster. And as we all know, the markets today are moving incredibly fast. Every company needs to be incredibly fast. It needs to be able to accelerate its product development, its sales, across the board. And the reasons we're seeing companies move much, much faster is just because customer needs are evolving faster. There's so many new technologies, so many new needs that are being uncovered, and so many more solutions out there to solve those needs. The opportunity has become much, much larger. It's global in nature, and even small startups today can take their companies global very, very quickly, which is a massive change over the last 10, 15 years. But part of that problem is also because you can go global, because you can move faster, there are also more companies vying for those same customers. So every company out there is feeling more competition. They're feeling the pressure of not only startups, but of larger companies attacking their market. So whether you're a leader in your market, whether you're a contender, challenger, it doesn't really matter. There is much more competition today than there ever has been. And interestingly enough, that competition also leads to customers expecting much more than before. So the bar keeps going up and customers continue to expect more out of their solutions, whether that's in their personal life, whether that's in their work life. And so this is a topic that I've become very passionate about. Gene and I have spent a lot of time talking about it, but that's really a core part of, I think, the fundamental underpinnings of why IT decentralization is so important, because companies need to move much faster. So let's sort of step back for just a second, because I think this is very helpful in understanding kind of business today, and also understanding the DevOps movement and how it's sort of come about. A long time ago, basically, business was local. It was artisan-like. People did not buy things in mass quantity. People didn't produce things in mass quantity. It was a very local experience. And then along came the Industrial Revolution. We moved much more towards standardization and mass quantity, much cheaper prices, and just a more global or national in scope nature of markets. Today, it's very interesting with concepts such as DevOps, with concepts or new technologies that are out there. You sort of can create this sort of bridge between artisan quality and understanding of customers, but also that mass market ability to reach people, to deliver products and services globally, and to do it at a cost that's reasonable. And I think that is one of the most interesting parts of being in today's business environment, is the meshing of those two, really what used to be opposite factors coming together, and companies saying, we want to provide our customers with a more tight relationship, but do it at a cost that they can afford. So I think that's a very interesting part of where we're at today, and it leads to a lot of the challenges that companies are facing, because they are trying to bridge that gap between having incredible quality and understanding their customers so well, but doing that at a cost and a scale that is different. That creates a bunch of different challenges. Those challenges relate to how do they build their business much faster? How do they innovate faster with the same amount of resources? How do they deliver products more quickly? How do they solve their customer needs better? How do they deal with online security and all the issues related to identity theft and security breaches? And how do they do all of that and deliver the same margins that they were delivering before, but yet building a more customized and more catered experience for their customers? So those are some of the challenges that organizations, whether they're small or large, are facing today. And we think a lot of the solution really is in decentralization and of the business, but also in IT. And what it leads to is just a completely faster time to market, less bureaucracy. It's closer to the customer so that people can make better decisions. They can take advantage of that knowledge that they have, and they can trust their teams that are closest to the customers to make the best decisions for their products and for their companies. They're also taking advantage of a much smarter, more global workforce where you can find the best people to do the job regardless of where they're located. And all of that is leading to, you hope, greater employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction. And so the approach of decentralizing the business, of sort of extending out to the edges and making the company go faster because the decision making is done at the edge, is really driving this sort of movement to make companies much, much faster. And we believe that IT is at the core of it. So if you look back 10, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, IT was an important part of businesses. But today, IT in many, many companies, if not virtually all of them, has become a driver. And they are out there, either IT is the product, it either underpins the product, or potentially it's a limiter to the product. So you think about even non-technical industries, non-high-tech industries, where IT is such an enabler to having the business move much faster, whether that relates to billing, whether that relates to CRM or other aspects of the business that need to be underpinned by IT in order to move faster. we believe that IT is absolutely at the core of companies trying to move faster. And so that relates to how can you have IT move faster? How can decentralization help IT? And there's a number of different sort of areas where decentralization is helping today, and it will continue to help. And the topic today obviously is on DevOps, and we're going to talk with Gene much more about how that decentralization is making an impact, and also how companies are leveraging DevOps to move much, much quicker across their whole business, not just across IT. But there are other methodologies, other technologies that people are using to move much quicker and to create that decentralized, fast-moving environment, whether that's BYOD, bring your own device, whether that's leveraging the multitude of SaaS applications that are out there to solve virtually all the needs that companies are having these days with software, and hybrid cloud infrastructure so that you don't have to build your own data centers, and also finding the best workers wherever they are. So these are all examples of decentralization opportunities that IT has in order to make their part of the world go faster, but subsequently to them going faster, that's what makes the whole business go faster. And that's how IT is connected to the overall, how can a business move much faster? How can they compete better? How can they deliver better solutions to their customers quicker?
Hey, Raj, one thing that really startled me in my study of high performers over the last 16 years is one of the lessons that sort of got ingrained to me was, about remote workers, especially in operations. The way that, if you go back one slide,
Yeah.
the way I was trained, right? We thought that you need, all your operations people in one place, right? And I think one of the best pieces of the literature that motivated that was, Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey Jr. And, essentially, the notion is that we tend to trust the person who sits right next to us more than the person on a different floor, let alone a different building, let alone someone who's multiple time zones away. And so imagine my surprise in high-performing DevOps organizations that often they would have a significant portion of their ops employees working remotely. In fact, at GitHub, this was up until very recently, there were no two ops engineers in the same city. And so, I think it really does show how much things have changed that really enable decentralization, even in operations. Even in high outage cost, high tempo operations organizations, you can actually have remote employees. That was a genuinely big surprise to me.
And the punchline there obviously is the companies that can leverage that capability to find the best ops engineers wherever they may be located and take advantage of that, harness that, are going to move faster and they're going to win.
Yeah, totally right. In fact, did I see correctly that the next slide is mine?
It is.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, so, I'll paint one more motivation.
Before we do, Gene,
yeah.
Gene, it's Alan. Before we do, I just wanted to jump in here really quickly. We had a polling question or two that I wanted to ask our audience that may help kind of reflect on what Raj has talked about and what you're going to talk about, Gene. So this good interactive to get our audience involved. Let's pop up our first polling question. It'll just take a few seconds. And if our audience would just take a moment here to answer this, are you able to deliver new software to production as often as your business demands? It's kind of a yes or no answer. And if you would, again, just take a moment to answer here.
I can't vote. Only
no, you're not allowed to vote. Sorry, Gene. Sorry, Raj. We're gonna close polling here in just a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So 68%. I guess we probably expected that, right? Are not able to deliver software to production as often as the business demands. And of course, I'm sure, Gene, you probably hear a lot more of this than we do. Jules, why don't we hit the next polling question if we can? This is actually a great question, too. What percentage of your deployments are automated? And we have a couple of ranges here, and kind of we'll give everyone a few seconds to vote here. It looks Well, it looks a little better than it usually does. We'll close voting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and the answers here are, you know what? This is a pretty automated audience because usually uh, the second, the 25% and the 0 to 25% represent about 70% of the respondents. Here, 50 to 70% of 50 to 75% automation represents fully a third of respondents, with 100% of automation with 6%, which is about 3 times more than we usually see. So I think we have a fairly DevOps enabled crowd, for whatever that means. So that being said, Gene, take it away.
Yeah, you got it. Well, so I just want to talk about one of the things I've learned over the last year and a half studying high performers is all stuff that's going into the upcoming DevOps cookbook. And so, of course, we're all familiar with the famous 10 deploys a day presentation that was given by John Alston and Paul Hammond at the Velocity conference in 2009. And the reason why I bring this up is not so much to talk about Alston and Hammond, it's really about the unit of measure. So 10 deploys a day in 2009 was considered shockingly fast. And in the next slide, I think we would agree that these days 10 deploys a day isn't so shockingly fast. In fact, what we found in doing our benchmarking of over 14,000 organizations over the last 3 years is that these days 10 deploys a day is considered maybe average for high performers. In fact, maybe even mediocre. Well, not mediocre, just on the lower end of what high performing is these days. So if you build it out one more time, this slide came from John Jenkins when he presented at the Velocity conference in 2011. And he went on record saying that they're not doing 10 deploys a day. Instead, they are doing 1 deploy every 11.6 seconds. And so that's a mean number of deployments per day of about 23,000 deployments per day. So, to go from 10 deploys a day to 23,000 deploys is pretty surprising. Raj, can you go to the next slide, please? And the next slide. So what's even more astonishing is that these days, we're finding that they're doing, and the same organization is not doing 23,000 deploys a day. They are doing 50 million deployments per year, and if you do the math, that's about 136,000 deploys per day. So that statistic came from Ken Exner, the Director of Dev Resources at Amazon. And so the interesting, well, I guess if we can just sort of pause for a moment and reflect on just how astonishing that is, right? And so that certainly begs the question, what is a deployment? So a deployment would be any one of these activities. It could be a developer checking code into trunk, which then gets migrated into the production environment, invisible to the customer, certainly without causing chaos and disruption to the production environment or to the customer experience. It could be a feature going live through the enabling of a feature flag. It could be a configuration change in the environment. It could be thousands of new environments coming online, all considered to be one deploy. And so I think what this demonstrates really is that the organization can make changes when it matters the most. And so the question that I think is so provocative is that when you ask what changed at Amazon between 2011 and 2015, and I think the surprising answer is really nothing changed at Amazon except for one thing, which is the number of developers. And so I think what DevOps really shows us is that under certain conditions, we can scale developer productivity linearly with the number of developers. In other words, why do I think this is so important? Frederick Brooks, in his famous book, The Mythical Man Month, has trained generations of technology leaders that if you double the number of developers, we will double the effort required to integrate the code, to test the code, and ultimately to deploy the code to customers. And so I think this pattern really shows that there are organizations that are actually breaking the Mythical Man Month. So Raj, if you go to the next slide, you can see the same effect taking place, and this time at Etsy. So this is a slide that was put together by Dr. Nicole Forsgren that she presented at the DevOps Enterprise Summit last October. And she showed these compilation of statistics that showed how code deployment at Etsy used to take 6 to 14 hours, and an army and now it takes less than 15 minutes and one person. And so again, you see this ever-increasing number of deploys per day, from 30 deploys a day to 50 to 80, 90, and they're doing over hundreds of deploys per day now. And again, what changed at Etsy between 2013 and today? Nothing really, except for the number of developers. And so just to motivate this point, let's go to the next slide. So why I think this amazing statistic that you find even at the earliest, at the genesis of the DevOps movement, this deploys per day metric, is actually hiding an even more important metric, which is deploys per day per developer. In other words, deploys per day is actually a proxy for deploys per day per developer. So just give me a second. So there's really three things required to make this happen, right? Is that we need developers to be able to independently write code, qualify their code or test their code, and deploy it into production. And we certainly can't do that. So it requires cultural norms, it requires technical practices, but also an architecture that allows us to do that. In other words, every time that we deploy a small change, we can't have to synchronize and coordinate with 1,500 other developers. So let's go to my last slide, which is really to show how constraints move in an organization. One of my favorite quotes is, in fact, one of my favorite books of all time that has influenced my professional career the most over the last 20 years is a book called The Goal. And so that's it's integrated into almost every mainstream MBA curriculum. And there's this wonderful phrase that Dr. Goldratt says in this book. He said, in any flow of work, there's only one bottleneck. And that if you improve anything else anywhere besides a bottleneck, it's an illusion. And the logical proof point that he gave was, if you prove something after the bottleneck, it will always remain starved for work, waiting for work from the bottleneck. If you improve something before the bottleneck, the work just piles up ever more quickly at the bottleneck. And so as we go from large organizations that are which require lead time measured in months, where it takes months to go from code committed through the test cycle, through the deployment cycle, to successfully running in production, to ideally one where it's running in minutes, right? In general, here's how the constraint move. In general, it starts with environment creation. You can't get to 10 deploys a day if every time you want to do a deployment, it takes 6 weeks to get a test environment. So the countermeasure is you want to create environments available on demand. Then the constraint becomes code deployment. You can't get to 10 deploys a day if every time you want to deploy code, it takes 6 weeks to execute the 1,300 manual steps. And so the countermeasure is, how do we automate that as much as possible? After that, usually the constraint becomes test up and run. You can't get to 10 deploys a day if every time you want to test a change, it requires 2 weeks to create the test data sets and 4 weeks to execute all the manual regression testing. So the countermeasure is, how do you automate that as much as possible so that, and probably more than that, we have to parallelize that so that the test rate can keep up with the deployment rate. And then I think we get to the constraint that I think many organizations become stuck at, which is that we can't get to 10 deploys a day if every time we want to make a small change, we have to coordinate with 1,500 other developers on these intricate release trains, and coordinate with perhaps 35 different product groups, get approval from change approval boards, lead architecture review boards. And why do we need that? Is because everyone's so afraid that our small little change is going to cause global chaos and disruption. And so that is a symptom of overly tight architectures. And so where things are too tightly coupled together. And so that's an architectural issue. The countermeasure is, how do we make things more loosely coupled so that we can decentralize the work and allow smaller groups to work with more autonomy and freedom. So Google is working on 4,000 simultaneous projects. There's no spreadsheet at Google with 4,000 rows where a central PMO is surveilling how those 4,000 groups are doing. They're working in a highly decoupled, decentralized fashion with a safety net of automated testing, which helps make sure that small errors cause small impact, as opposed to what happens in most tightly coupled organizations, is that small errors cause global catastrophic impact. And then the countermeasure really, then the constraint really becomes development and product management. In other words, one of the things you hear almost every high performer say, whether they're dev, test, operations, or even information security, our goal is to maximize developer productivity, to allow them to work with autonomy and freedom in a decentralized way without jeopardizing the organizational goals. So this notion of decentralization, I think you will find at the core of how high performers work. And so that requires really three things. It requires cultural norms. It requires all those technical practices like continuous builds, continuous integration, continuous test, and ultimately continuous delivery. And the fourth is an architecture that supports that. So with that, Raj, let me turn it back over to you. So decentralization is great, but obviously it creates certain risks, right? And suddenly you need those controls that, coming from a security background, will seem very familiar. We need those configuration controls, those access controls to make sure that, decentralization doesn't cause wildly decentralized risk that's not mitigated.
Sure. So Gene and Raj, we've left plenty of time for questions, and while we've got some in the hopper and other, I invite the audience now to put your questions into the question section. But while we do, I actually wanted to continue this conversation a little bit. And, Raj, I think the point of your slides obviously were that one of the underlying premises of it was that IT is sort of the engine that's pulling these modern organizations into new times. And we hear it, software is eating the world. We've all heard takes on this. I'm not sure where we're getting some feedback, but I mean, there are organizations, and Gene, you speak to hundreds of organizations, manufacturing, old kind of school organizations where IT perhaps is not the engine of change, where IT perhaps is not, is maybe the caboose instead of the engine. How do these companies, or can these companies, where do they fit in the brave new world, Gene?
Yeah. So it's why am I laughing, right? Because I think there is this misnomer, especially outside of the technology groups, that that technology doesn't have to be a core competency, right? In fact, in the Phoenix project, the fictitious company Parts Unlimited, we made them an automotive manufacturer, just to represent that archetype where they would say that our core competency is manufacturing, it's our supply chain, but technology is this back office function that really isn't required to help us win in the marketplace. I mean, if we could have made the main company a gravel manufacturer, we would have, even when the business is crushing rocks for a business, right? If without those back-end systems, we wouldn't know where to ship the rocks. We wouldn't be able to know where we can sell, a specific type of gravel for. It turns out that it's a very, each state needs a different parts list. So we don't even know where to ship the rocks, how to process the rocks, and ultimately where to sell the rocks. And so I love this GE quote from Jeffrey Immelt. He said, every company is a software company. You go to sleep as a manufacturing company, you wake up as a software company. And I think increasingly what the reality is that how every organization acquires customers and ultimately delivers value to them is increasingly reliant on the technology value stream. So, in every industry vertical, we are far more reliant on quote IT than we think, and I think that's really one of the main lessons in the Phoenix project. And this is the reason why I am so passionate about not so much the unicorns, not the Googles, Amazon, Netflixes, Etsy, Facebooks, and so forth. It really is about the horses. Large, complex organizations are adopting DevOps patterns and principles and achieving the same sort of miraculous outcomes that the unicorns are. And ultimately, it's because they're all saying, whether they're a Macy's, Raytheon, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Nationwide Insurance, what they're all verbalizing is that if we don't do this, if we don't adopt DevOps, then ultimately we are not going to be able to win in the marketplace, or maybe even survive in the marketplace. And so, I think collecting those stories is something that is absolutely my area of passion right now.
That was a softball for you, Gene. But when you said something that's interesting though. When do these stop being miraculous outcomes and start being expected outcomes because the data shows that that is what happens.
I'll jump into that, Alan. I think,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, Gene, you can jump in after for sure. I think the expectation is now. There's plenty of data that this works. There's plenty of data that you can innovate, you can move faster, you can deploy faster, you can test better, you can work on multiple projects. I mean, your whole business can move faster, and I think there's enough examples of non-technical companies, non-unicorn-like companies, if you will, that prove it day in, day out. And I think everybody in IT should have an expectation these days that they can help their company move much, much faster. And I think the days of people saying that in IT, you know, we're not sort of the driver in the organization for companies that are, say, manufacturing companies, or as Gene's example of a gravel manufacturer. I don't think that's true. I think today there's so many aspects of any business that touch IT, and the faster IT can move, the faster the business can move. And I absolutely believe that in just about every business, one of the gating factors of being able to have that business grow and move faster is IT. And that's the opportunity too, right? So
Fantastic.
Not only the limiter, it's the absolute opportunity.
So let me throw this at both of you. My premise is that speed alone, speed can kill. You don't do speed for speed alone. You also have not given enough, and we haven't spoken enough about higher quality. And to me, Gene and Raj, that was a key thing I saw come out of our DevOps Connected RSA this year that really got security people going. We could go faster, have better quality, and be more secure. Now that's miraculous. And you know, I think that's an element here that we need to touch on, and I'll throw it both to you, Gene and Raj. The aspect of going faster also leads to higher quality. It's kind of counterintuitive at some level, but
very counterintuitive. Yeah, you know, in fact, I would, it is one of the most startling moments in my professional career, and this notion was, so I had mentioned this benchmarking that we had done. I've had the privilege of working with a gentleman named Jez Humble, so he's one of the co-authors of the book Continuous Delivery. And so we worked with Puppet Labs to benchmark 14,000 organizations over the last now 3 years. And what we found was startling, was that, you know, those organizations that do smaller deployments more frequently were massively outperforming their non-high-performing peers. So as Raj said, right, it is all about speed, but one of the side effects is that they have far better reliability as well. So, you know, just briefly, what we found was that these high performers were doing 30 times more frequent deployments, and more importantly, they had a lead time measured in minutes versus months. In other words, how quickly could they go from code committed into the source code repos through some sort of test cycle, through deployment to running in production. High performers could do it in minutes, whereas lower performers would take months. Right? And so that absolutely dictates how quickly you can iterate in the marketplace. The big surprise was that not only are these high performers iterating more quickly, doing more iterations, but they're getting far better outcomes. When they do a deployment, they're twice as likely to succeed without causing some sort of Sev1 outage, service impairment, security breach, or compliance failure. And when something bad does happen, they can fix those issues 12 times faster. In other words, the mean time to restore service was 12 times faster. And this is all, so I think this validates so much of our common experience, which is that in general, the larger the deployment that we put into production, the larger the crater it makes in the production environment, and the longer it requires us to actually recover from the deployment, and fill in the pothole. So I think that's really the key of getting faster flow, but also increasing reliability, securability, compliance, etc.
Raj?
Gene, yeah, I think almost by definition, in order to go faster, you must create loosely coupled systems, and so almost by definition, you go faster, you do get better quality, increased reliability, and all of that sort of hangs together. And that's one of the things I wanted to point out, is that the issues that you face by going faster and by decentralizing are not trivial as well. So there's a number of issues. Some of them are cultural, some of them are technology related, some of them are security related, some of them are related to what we do at JumpCloud, related to directories. But there are very real issues to moving much faster, and that's primarily why we wrote the ebook that we wrote on IT decentralization. So we cover a number of topics, and Gene's article in that covers some of the pitfalls of doing DevOps and how you basically adjust your model in order to take those pitfalls into account so that you don't fall into those traps. But the same is true for hybrid infrastructure, BYOD, a number of different areas that you want to tackle. There are risks, and as Alan said, speed can kill, and so you want to be careful about how you do it. You want to be smart about how you do it, and so that was one of the reasons that we put out that technical documentation so that we could help people understand it.
You know, one comment on that. I think that it is a very real fact that how control environments look these days, especially in kind of these DevOps value streams, we're really doing everything to empower developers to be productive, look very different than a control environment that many of us grew up in and many of us were trained in. And so, you know, instead of having large capital projects that have the highest level of approvals that are controlled through the project management office, and we have stage gate processes where we have sign-off points at each stage of the software development lifecycle, and then a change approval board, you know, that monitors hundreds of changes each week. You know, these days, you know, we're doing everything to decentralize that authority, to make developers widely productive. You know, what worked for hundreds of deploys or changes per week, you know, are no longer suitable for organizations doing hundreds of deploys per day. And suddenly we rely less on these approval processes, rely far more on peer review, on automation, automated testing, automated deployments. So I think you know, I have a lot of sympathy for the security manager, for the audit, for the IT auditor who is walking into these value streams that look very, very different than the ones that we saw 10 years ago. And you know, it is so while the control environment looks very different, right? There may not be separation of duty, there may not be change approval processes. You know, there are controls. You know, the high-performing organizations are integrating those objectives, those control objectives, into every part of their daily work, whether it's dev, test, or operations, even information security. And so, you know, I think you know, the good news is technology is this phenomenal enabler. We can decentralize this, and we can go far faster than ever. The bad news, I think, is from a control practitioner perspective, we need to be familiar with what these new control environments look like. That can do just as good a job in preventing bad things from happening, and even when bad things occur, we can detect and correct for them quickly.
Absolutely, shifting them left. Guys, we have a bunch of questions from the audience, though, and I need for us to jump in on that if we can. And I apologize, my phone went off there, but let me get to some questions from the audience. First is my organization practices workshops with the speed of trust. How can I leverage the current practice to enable high-performing DevOps? Gene, that sounds like a Gene question.
I love speed of trust. I love Stephen Covey. In fact, between us, I think Stephen Covey Jr. Has surpassed his father, the 7 Successful Habits guy. Yeah, so you know, there's actually 2 books that I really love. One is The Speed of Trust, and the other one is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I think both of them are so relevant because in order to get these incredible attributes of speed and agility that are enabled through decentralization, ultimately it requires groups who have been able to work with some level of distrust for decades, or maybe even transcends distrust, maybe even goes to a constant sense of betrayal between dev, test, operations, and especially information security. I think it requires that we create a sense of shared goals, right? So in other words, dev's goal is not to ship more features ever more quickly and push them into production, right, with disastrous outcomes. And the goal of operations is not just to do everything it takes to maintain 100% reliability, which means stonewall every change that comes in. And I've seen so many examples of where dev and ops start working together to say, hey, our goal is to win the marketplace, and we need to iterate more quickly and do it without jeopardizing the organization. And that is, I would say it's some element of a technology challenge, but ultimately it really requires, some people would say a culture change, but I feel like in some ways it really does a disservice to what you're suggesting, which is it really requires trust between the leaders, which results in a wildly different way of working, where operations can say, yeah, you know what, we will allow, of course it's a good idea to allow some new configurations to go into production or have a different platform, a JBoss 6 platform instead of the standard 5.2 or whatever, because this is what ultimately allows groups to get what they need done. And so, in fact, I saw something like that happen yesterday at a large bank, and it was just one of the coolest things to see a cynical ops person say things and by words and in deeds, through their actions, do things that look so different from their behaviors years prior, and led everyone to believe that everyone really was on the same team, working together to achieve a common goal to help the organization win in the marketplace. So I guess to directly answer your question, Speed of Trust, phenomenal resource. I would put it up there with 5 dysfunction of the team, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's any level of distrust between dev, test operations, InfoSec, that those are the tools we deploy to help create a sense of shared goals and shared trust.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to our next question. I don't know if they want to read their name, but deploys are not the same as releases in a non-DevOps world, and we get ourselves into trouble when making comparisons. We sound smug. So is there a way to measure the old world versus the new world that is fair while showing that there are real improvements? Raj, would you like to take first crack at that?
Sure. I think that, from a company that's a SaaS vendor, it makes a lot of sense. We talk about deploys and releases sort of differently, and I think it's a wonderful question, because you can lose sight of the true value that you're delivering by focusing on deploys per day per dev. I think it's a wonderful metric, but the ultimate metric that also needs to be included is what is the customer seeing? What is going out to the customer? How is that helping them? And there are many things that we do that are behind the scenes that are for stability or availability or performance that the customer may not see directly. And so breaking those out so that you can understand what value you're providing to the customer that they can see versus what may be behind the scenes. It's still value, but it's done differently. So I think it's a wonderful question, and I would encourage people to separate out the metrics and not get so focused on deploys per day, per dev, if you will, such that they lose the mindset or the visibility into what the customer is seeing and what is being delivered. And hopefully a great product management function will help drive metrics on that side as well.
Excellent, Raj. Gene,
One of my
anything to add
favorite
on that one?
stories. Yeah. One of my favorite presentations from DevOps Enterprise Summit last October was a gentleman named Scott Prue. He's chief architect and now head of development for CSG. They're the largest bill printing company in the U.S. So if you get a paper bill from a cable company or maybe a wireless carrier, it comes probably from a CSG plant. And so they did this amazing experiment for their COBOL mainframe app. It's like 40 years old, and the surrounding 20 technology platforms. And they started doing daily deploys to a UAT environment. And the reason to do that was, even though they were on a releasing twice a year schedule, and they actually doubled it to releasing every quarter, the main reason why they did daily deploys was so that was to increase the predictability of the actual release. So to be very specific, right, the release is kind of the customer-facing event where we announce the feature availability to customers. Is what the customer sees, where a deployment really is the mechanical act of moving code from dev to test or test to UAT or UAT to production. So by doing daily deploys to a UAT environment, between every quarterly release, they're rehearsing it 90 times, right? And so by the time you do something 90 times, you become very good at doing it the 100th time. And so even though their release frequency stayed the same or maybe doubled, right? The fact that we did daily deploys so much, just wildly increased the success of the rollouts. So incident count went down by 80%, mean time to repair went down by like 95%. But the most important one that I love is what was the lead time measure. So the time required to go from deployment started to deployment ended went from 14 days. So that was 14 days of a war room filled 24/7 of panicked people trying to get the release up and running. It went from 14 days to less than a day. In other words, the release was finished by 5 p.m. on the first day. So Scott sent me a picture of the ops people playing Xbox, right? Just waiting for the business analysts to accept the release. And so, yes, releases and deployments are very different, but deploys, doing fast and frequent deploys really empowers operations to be accountable for the quality and predictability of the deploy, which ultimately affects the predictability of the release. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's something I obviously care, I'm very passionate about.
Never apologize for long-winded answers, Gene. Our next question, how can we influence higher management to go for decentralization? Raj, you have a lot of experience in higher management. What do you say?
I think the best way to go about convincing higher management is to pick off little things that you can do and basically go to them and say, here's the benefit, let us go try it, and then go deliver on it, and do it step by step. So take baby steps, take one particular topic, one particular area that you're passionate about, show that the value is going to be, and then go demonstrate that value in practicality, if you will, and that will get the ball moving. So it's all about delivering and showing the value, and just pick whichever thing you want, go convince them to give it a shot. You can make it small so that everybody feels like it's a trial, if you will, a pilot, whatever you want to call it, to gain that trust and momentum, and then bite off bigger chunks after that.
Okay, we're going to move to the next. We have a lot of questions, guys, so I'm going to try to hit them. The next one really is more of a statement, though, and the person put in, you need to automate everything in the pipeline, including security and even the change request. The three of us have some serious security backgrounds. Gene, what do you think? Can we automate security?
Absolutely. In fact, yes. And I think the exemplars of who is doing this great at scale is Topo Pal. He's one of the head architects at Capital One, and they don't call it DevOps there. They call it DevOpsSec, where they really integrate static code analysis right alongside the unit testing. They are running dynamic security testing right alongside proactive monitoring in the production environment. And it really shows that they're doing active pen testing almost on a weekly basis. So it really does show how it can be done. Incidentally, Salesforce described last year how now they got approval from the security function that all automated infrastructure changes made through Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, whatever, will now be considered standard changes. No manual approval required. So imagine how great that is. And just to land the punch, right? All manual infrastructure changes still require approval. So just to show how great life can be. So totally on board with the statement made.
DevOpsSec, huh? Not rugged DevOps. Just bringing it out. You mentioned, you know what though, Gene, I do want to mention this, is that a lot of people not from the security world kind of not make fun of security people, but question why do the security people feel it necessary to append sec to the DevOps name? And I don't, it's not a religious thing to me, but just quickly, you want to, touch on that?
Yeah, I think there's a real valid feeling. I can understand where they're coming from. Is that DevOps in the information security circles is often viewed as a wildly bad thing, right? Now DevOps can go rampant, do whatever they want, with horrendous outcomes, right? They're going to run around security just like they've been wanting to do for 10 years. And I think Josh Corman, who's CTO of a company called Sonatype, we all work together to create this DevOps Sec conference at RSA to really show that DevOps is actually the almost ideal way to integrate security into the daily work of dev, test, and operations. And so I think DevOps Sec is really a way to signal to security that, hey, Dev and Ops, we're waiting for you with open arms, and it's good for security just as like it's good for Dev, Ops, and ultimately the organizations that we serve.
Yeah, I think it's just as simple as saying that by having Sec on there, it acknowledges that the organization cares about security.
Yeah, I think organizations do. But all right, let's move to the next one because we're running short on time, I'm afraid. You mentioned increase in developers, also increase in deployment and in productivity. What about operation systems engineers? Is there a ratio of developers to operations that you recommend? Gene?
Oh, what a great question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So the traditional ratio that I've seen bandied about a lot by James Wickett, whose work I admire for many, many years. He's now at Signal Sciences. He said kind of the classic ratio is 100 to 10 to 1, meaning for 100 developers, you might have 10 ops people, and then you have one security person, right? So just imagine how crappy it feels to be outnumbered as a security person, 100 to 10 to 1. I think what's amazing, right, is studying how Disney has organized themselves. Jason Cox, who also spoke at the DevOps Enterprise Summit last year, talked about how he has about 60 ops engineers that he then embeds, throughout the entire Disney enterprise. And what's amazing is just how much impact he's had with only 60 people, right? I mean, so, by my math, right, 60 ops engineers means that you can only impact the work of 600 developers, and yet he's done so much more than that. I mean, he's made, he's impacted hundreds or even thousands of developers, and I think it's because you don't need to permanently embed an ops engineer, into a service team forever, right? You can onboard them onto these great platforms that we build, and once they're there, ultimately, we can transition them out and send them to the next great team to help them achieve their goals. So, I would say, actually, let me just think about this for a moment. I think it is obvious to me that a great ops engineering SRE team one ops engineer can impact hundreds of developers, maybe even over time, thousands of developers.
Excellent. I'm going to jump to the next question. I'm going to throw it to you, Raj. In your experience, the 3 biggest mistakes or pitfalls in decentralized software development?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me think on that for a second.
While you're thinking?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Gene, any?
Yeah, I'll give you some, Raj. Yeah, okay. Decentralization often means we don't get all the personnel into HR systems, that we don't control the credentials, we don't properly give them the entitlement rights, and so when that doesn't happen, then when it comes time that this person leaves the organization, suddenly we have ghost accounts and so forth, and any auditor will tell stories about bad audits where people who've left the organizations 4 years ago still have accounts, with access to all bunch of things, right? And that's obviously not good. So,
and obviously, Gene, we focus on that, so you know that. So yep, I think that's one of them. Go ahead.
So we need three biggest pitfalls.
Yep.
It's
Gene, did you have another one, or do you want me to jump in?
Unauthorized still. Yeah,
I
access,
think,
configuration, change.
Yeah, I agree. I think security is another major pitfall for decentralized organizations. I would also sort of back up. I was just trying to think of sort of overarching, and I think culture for a decentralized organization is incredibly important.
Bingo.
When I think of decentralized, I think of potentially in different locations. I think of different types of teams. I think of teams that are working on different projects from one another, and it has the opportunity to create many, many different cultures, if you will, or individual cultures. And so how do you unify that team into having one common culture with one common goal, with, kind of one common vision. I think that's incredibly difficult. If I were in that situation, and we often are because of the stuff that we work on, you focus a great deal on the fundamental underpinnings, which is culture.
Fair enough. Guys, we're not even halfway through questions, so I'm going to need to move on real quick. Another security-related one here was, how would this support and enhance companies that fall in HIPAA, SOX, and PCI compliance? That's kind of right up our alley.
I'll take that. I think the stuff that we've been talking about today with DevOps, with kind of greater control in some ways, although decentralized, is right up the alley of compliance. There's more automation, there's more documentation, there's more logging, there is just more control over what is happening within the organization, and as a result, you have a better opportunity to achieve compliance and maintain compliance.
Yep, and I'll second that. And again, I point you to the recent RSA conference, DevOps Connect event we held. Gene and Josh spoke there. A bunch of other people spoke there. And we actually touched on this topic. And as counterintuitive as it may sound, you can actually achieve better compliance easier following these types of DevOps principles and methodologies. But moving right along, Gene, here's an easy one. I actually have some answers on this, but you probably know them better. Do we have any recent statistics about the adoption of DevOps in the enterprise? Gene?
Yes. In fact, I would say the best list is the speaker list from the DevOps Enterprise Summit. So for that, just go to the devopsenterprise.io website, and you'll see organizations you'll see the largest, most recognized brands in almost every industry vertical. And this year coming up, as mentioned to Alan, it's going to be an even better conferences coming up in October, where we have more representation from banking, healthcare. So these are the types of organizations that were maybe underrepresented last year, and so we've been looking for the best practitioners in the game in those spaces. So for that, to go to slideshare.net/realgenekim, and you'll see a list of companies that have been cataloging who have been adopting DevOps at all stages of the journey. But certainly I think it is not an overstatement to say every industry category is adopting DevOps.
Yep. And I would just quickly add, if you look at the most recent Gartner, Forrester reports, and granted they were probably sponsored by vendors, it's something like 40 to 45% of Global 2000 companies are probably using or deploy some sort of DevOps methodology or methods right now, and the thought is that within the next 24 to 36 months, that may go as high as 80 to 85%. So it's really a critical mass, super majority kind of number that goes in there. Gene, before we hang up, and Raj as well, I wanted to give our listeners a chance to find out more about DevOps Enterprise Summit, where they can get more info on JumpCloud. But let's see if we get another question or two in. Does DevOps have a place in an IT organization that is not supporting software development? Raj?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, yeah, absolutely. Even if it's just business analysts and using custom off-the-shelf software, it's not the most common configuration of DevOps, but ultimately, what you can do it for SAP, Oracle Financials, for Siebel, CRM, right? All these really hairy things where you have quarter-long lead times. You can bring them down to a week. There are lots of great examples of people who've done that. So if you're interested in that, in fact, we're going to have a bunch of people presenting on just that at DevOps Enterprise this year.
Let me give everybody maybe a different way to look at DevOps, or a different definition that I think, for me at least, really resonates, and it sort of takes IT out of the equation. I view DevOps as sort of effectively the optionality of getting to better customer fit. So it's testing a number of ideas in your product, in your service, whatever it may be, that better matches your customer's needs. So if you take IT out of it for a second and just said, you know, regardless of the product or service that you deliver, what you're trying to do under DevOps, quote unquote, is really find better product market fit, better match the customer needs with your product and vice versa, so that you can capture more of the market. And so I would argue any company can leverage the concepts of DevOps. You may want to call it something different than DevOps, but effectively DevOps is creating a number of iterations of whatever product or service that you're selling so that you can better match customer needs. And it doesn't have to be because you did it in software.
Okay. Guys, we're at the top of the hour, and I know people's time is valuable, and we'll start. It's not right. We're going to call it a wrap right here, but before we do, Gene, real quick, if people want to find out more about the DevOps Enterprise Summit and follow you, where can they go?
Oh boy. Yeah, why don't you just email me at genek@itrevolution.net, or you can go to the devopsenterprise.io webpage to get announcements of speakers, announcements, and so forth. There's even a mailing list that you can join that will give you all the latest news.
And we will have that up on our page for the webinar on devops.com. Raj, what about if they want to find out more about Jump Cloud Directory as a Service and more of what you guys are talking about?
Yeah, we would love to talk to you if you're interested in Directory as a Service. It's fundamental and core to many of the things that we've been talking about here, giving you full control over user access and configurations and things like that. You can find more information about us at jumpcloud.com, and obviously my email is up on the slides at rajat@jumpcloud.com. Feel free to email me, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay. Gene, Raj, thank you very much. Before we sign off, guys or audience, this webinar was recorded. The slides, as well as a full recording with slides, will be available on devops.com. And you'll be able, within 24 to 48 hours, we usually post them up there. There was also a large number of questions we were not able to get to, and I apologize. What we do in these cases is our team will take the questions. We will submit them to Gene and Raj. We'll try to get some written answers and post them along with the recording of the webinar so that everyone's questions are answered, because we do appreciate the questions. That's what makes these webinars go. It's great to have speakers, but it's great to have an audience participating. Gene, Raj, thank you so much for joining us today on another great webinar. Thank you to Jump Cloud for sponsoring another DevOps.com webinar. Until next time, this is Alan Schimmel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and have a great day, everyone, and thank you for joining us.